Oh yeah. Also, Kirsty, I will be in solo layout while we do the intro.
Cool.
So
Do you want me to put myself on mute while you're doing that?
no,
No
I
worries.
trust you. I I trust you.
I won't, yeah, I won't bombard you.
Hello, bird nerds. It's the bird emergency again. I'm Grant Williams, and today we're going to talk to a bird nerd podcaster. Another new bird podcast. Well, there can never be enough, in my view. So, welcome to Kirsty Costa, who is the host, creator, and I, I got to say, I got a lot of admiration for someone who's pulling a full time gig and producing a podcast. Kirsty, how are you? Welcome to the Bird Emergency.
Hello, Grant. Yeah, look, I don't know whether it's respect or concern about someone who decides to do a podcast while working full time, but yet here we are.
Well, look, we're going to have a bit of a freeform discussion and talk about well, why you got into podcasting, which I'm not clear, even though we have had a discussion before, whether the birds led you to podcasting or whether you were already into podcasting. But let's start. Let's start with um, what has got you into bird watching, because I know that you've become a new bird watcher. So let's hear that part of the story.
I feel like as I've started to record my podcast, The Weekend Birder, that everyone has a similar story. I thought that was the case, but it turns out we've all got a slightly different way of arriving in bird nerdom. For me, I grew up camping and I grew up in nature. My father was an entomologist, so he was an insect nerd, and my mum was a geography teacher. So I guess that I spent a lot of my childhood looking at nature. And I ended up becoming a bit of an environmentalist campaigner in my 20s, which led to a life of environmental education in my 30s and 40s. And so I've always had a real connection and appreciation of nature. And I've also got a really strong curiosity about the world, which I'm sure drives half of the people that I know mad, because I'm always asking questions about the world and about nature. And why is always my question. So that led me to where we are now, which is becoming a bit further down the rabbit warren of exploring the world of birds. But I guess I've been primed for this my whole life. In fact, my husband talks about joining the bird cult, the bird watching cult. So I've, it all led to this moment of joining the bird watching cult. But that's sort of how I arrived here, through appreciating nature. And then I guess in 2020, I'm a big bushwalker, and I live down in the southeast of Melbourne. So I'm right near a beautiful wetland and a beautiful bit of the Port Phillip Bay, or Narm. And as part of that, I really missed nature when, we had to go into a series of lockdowns in Melbourne over the last few years. And so my daily walk became really precious to me. And I guess I moved then from being a bird noticer to a bird watcher. And that's where I started to, count my birds and get a decent pair of binoculars. So it's real fresh for me. It's only been 2.5 years of officially being a birder. Up until then, I think I was a bird noticer and a bird appreciator.
Now, thank you very much for bringing in your husband, and that he may be starting the journey. Shameless plug time. Urban Field Gnats have just put this little tome out. There we go. I don't know if you can see it. A guide to the creatures in your nature, in your neighbourhood. Urban Field Gnats, well worth getting hold of if hubby is a sort of new birder, so that you don't have to get him to be familiar with your bird books yet, but he can get started. And if he's interested in bark and leaves and lizards and anything else, uh, that'll get him started. So
I
there we
love
are.
that.
All right, totally. That's my shameless plug. I've been wanting to plug it for weeks and haven't. No one's given me an easy segue. So thanks very much for that.
You're
So
welcome.
so it's an interesting thing having an entomologist in the family, I reckon, Kirsty, because so many of us walk through the bush and don't have a holistic appreciation of what we're in, and this is probably the same anywhere in the world. I'm talking to people all of the time who never notice things like fungi. They've never noticed the different bark on eucalypt trees. Um, they they couldn't tell you, they couldn't describe a flower beyond a colour, and that's always bothered me. Um,
Mm.
I wonder, were you a a bug kid? Like, did Dad's influence in his professional life pervade the life at home? Were, were, were you preserving specimens of moths? Did you keep all the foam that you got in packaging so you could pin out the wings of butterflies and whatnot as a kid?
You know, when you describe it that way, it really sounds like a total animal torturer. I definitely was not that. In fact, I think I grew up with I've always had a very deep sense of empathy for living things in general. And so, but I do remember going into the Department of Agriculture as a kid and going to my dad's workplace and seeing hundreds and hundreds of what you just described, which is basically moths and butterflies. He specialized with the Department of Agriculture in looking at moths that eat our crops, and in particular, because he was also an environmentalist and conservationist, focused in on how you can use less pesticides in order to grow food. So that's what he did his PhD on armyworms, and that's what so he was a real moth man. But I think that he also did a part of a marine biology degree as well, and so I think him and my mum, their natural curiosity about the world was really inherited by my brothers and I, and we definitely grew up noticing. And there's something as special about that as well, the way you even described it then, about noticing fungi and noticing trees and noticing leaves. Recently, in the lead up to launching my podcast, I interviewed a neuropsychologist who explained how birdwatching is mindfulness, and how the noticing of nature is actually mindfulness practice. And there's all sorts of interesting stuff going on in our brains when we do it. But it's also a really good description of why so many of us feel so good after a bird watch. In fact, a friend of mine recently said, I'm feeling a bit angry. I'm just going to go off to a bird watch and I'll be back in half an hour, and calmed right down. So I guess that early, even though we weren't probably banging on about mindfulness when I was a kid, that was not even a word that was invented yet. I think the concept of it, people have known for a long time, and that noticing and that slowing down and looking at nature 100% was my childhood. But I do remember having snails, a lot of snails in a margarine container. And I remember there's a
Didn't we all do that?
famous family story about how I was watching Play School with my brothers, and I ran inside to mum very upset because Luke had eaten my pets, and my brother had decided to scoff a whole lot of the snails when he was like 2 years old, 1 year old. So we had a bit of that going on. I remember lots of stick insects and praying mantises, noticing them. And my parents had a beautiful garden made up of Indigenous plants from our area. And when they moved in, they actually removed the rose garden, and they got angry messages in their mailbox from the neighbours saying, you've ruined the beautiful rose garden, and replaced it with something like
with rubbish. Yes.
With rubbish.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So there was lots of that around us, kicking around. So yeah, I can definitely name a lot of insects, that's for sure.
Now, I'm going to date myself here again, Kirsty. I'm a few summers further down the track than you. I too had no idea what mindfulness was as a kid. What? But bug catchers were cool things when I was a kid, and you'd go out and you'd what was the ad? Gotcha. um, catching catching bugs. But one of the projects I did as a kid, and this is where I'm dating myself, we didn't think of collecting and displaying insects as torture. It was science, and I actually built myself a big display case and had a collection of insects. And you should know this, I would imagine, from your childhood. Moths, is that Lepidoptera? Is that the order Lepidoptera for moths?
Lepidoptera, yeah. So it's
There we go.
similar to like the bogon moth.
Yep.
It's the moths that basically they think get laid in fields
Yeah.
rather than the
Yeah.
moths that we know that grow in cocoons.
I just wanted
Yeah,
to be
so
sure that I'd got it right, and I knew I wouldn't have to look it up. That you would be able to tell me. But
yeah.
yeah, beetles and whatnot, and the reason I poke fun at mindfulness is because I've always been that kid that noticed beetles and noticed that there weren't just one type of Christmas beetle. You know, I probably collected half a dozen that flick beetles or click beetles. Um, moths and whatnot, shells, leaf types, bark types. I've always noticed them. I was trying to sort out the difference between hakeas and grevilleas when I was about 10 or 11. Uh, Now I just thought that was normal. I didn't realise that most people didn't do it.
Yeah.
So mindfulness for me is just something I've always lived. I didn't realise people had to go out and seek it. So so it's a joy to watch people discover birds and discover nature because I know what they're opening up into.
Yeah, I agree. And there is something about taking someone into nature in a time of crisis or in a time of elation or whatever, wherever we're at in our lives, and being able to watch someone change as we spend time in that space is such a privilege, and watching ourselves change as well. And and I think that it's really interesting because I live, near a big Ramsar listed wetland where I am, and I don't think half of my neighbourhood had actually walked around or been near that wetland because, pre the lockdowns, we were, all living busy lives and people were rushing from place to place and probably doing some long commutes, some of them. And it was amazing. It was like peak hour traffic on the wetland in the afternoon. So I think there was some, I don't want to bang on about lockdown and COVID because no one needs that, but I think there was some really amazing things that did happen during that time. And one of them is an appreciation of local spaces. I know that I found a whole lot of bush tracks that I didn't really know existed. And that was the moment where I actually really tuned into birds in a way that I'd always noticed, but not really, fully paid attention before. So yeah, it's interesting. But yeah, I think there's some values there that you probably grew up with and I grew up with that sort of helped us get us to where we are now in terms of priming us for properly appreciating nature and understanding the science of it. For sure.
Yeah, I have to always remind myself that I grew up. Actually, we used to have to traverse the wetlands that you lived near when it was. Remember when? Well, actually, you might not. I don't know whether you lived there when you were probably about 6 or 7. But remember when it was a shithole? And remember when Wells Road wasn't a freeway, and that it was a massive bottleneck to get from down where I lived, down the very end of the peninsula, to get up to Southland. Before Frankston had a decent shopping centre, we used to have to drive up to Southland, and that was a big adventure. And you'd drive through the Edinburgh wetlands, and it was a really sorry, it was a pretty sad looking place.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, right.
we've got to give a big tick to the responsible authorities, and I think we can probably say it's been the water authorities as well as local council and the state government, and probably there's been funds from the federal government, all the volunteer groups down there. Turned it into a fantastic community asset, and there's bitterns there.
Yeah. It's incredible. I grew up on Wurundjeri Woi country in the east of Melbourne. So, Bunurong Bunurong country, which I'm now on, and that incredible area is called Karam Karam in Bunurong, is such an incredible space and used to be much bigger and has been interrupted a lot by housing. But yeah, I've had the privilege of working with friends of groups in my local area and getting to know some of the water authorities and council and all the other people who really invest in that space. And it's an incredible privilege to live near it. And I think the great news is because more and more people know about it now and appreciate it, if it ever came under threat, there's enough of a community connection to it to be able to protect it as well, which makes me feel happy that it's in safe hands in a lot of ways.
I'm not sure if you remember, but I can remember being about 20, maybe 25, and there was a real fight. The community had to fight to save the wetlands from development, from being drained and filled in and whatnot. And Aspendale Gardens was once part of the wetland, and now it's a massive suburb. But what's left was really hard fought. So well done to the warriors of the 70s and the 80s and the 90s who have managed to get some of it protected.
Yeah, and thanks to the people who look after it today. It's a real team effort, and I know a lot of people are working together in all sorts of spaces around Australia and the world. People are collaborating and working together to care for those spaces. And that, I guess that's what gives me hope. That's what keeps me going. In my full-time work, I'm an environmental educator. So I spend quite a bit of time reading about the good and the bad news of the world. And it's, there's people give me hope every day. Lot to be optimistic about.
Every time I get hopeful, Kirsty, I get depressed as well. I mean, we're still, we are in a G20 nation with buckets of cash to throw at stuff that I certainly don't value. There's always buckets of cash for a whole lot of stuff, but it's an absolute battle to secure money to protect assets that can't ever be replaced. I mean, you can always build another building. You can always build another road. You can always resurface another footpath. You can always replace some drains, but you can't replace the last stand of indigenous vegetation that is in any location. A revegetation project does not replace standing intact habitat, and I can't believe we're still talking about that with government. But anyway, let's not get bogged down into that. People can listen to the bird emergency and hear me bang on about that endlessly. Lockdown and COVID do you reckon it's been a plus for awareness in nature? Like,
yeah, I don't know, to be honest. I don't like. I'm really grateful to live in Melbourne, and I'm really grateful. Being someone who's got health issues, I'm really grateful for the way that everyone worked together to keep me safe and me to keep other people safe. So I'm really grateful for that. I guess I saw people using our local spaces in a way that they hadn't before, and that was amazing to watch them connect to their local area. And in the development of the Weekend Birder podcast, I have had a privilege of, really, this podcast is about sharing the skills and advice and knowledge of our birdwatching community, and it's been amazing to hear their stories. And there seems to be some sort of trend where there seems to be more bird watchers now, or maybe more bird noticers, or maybe more nature observers. And I know, talking to people like the amazing people at BirdLife, that they've said that there's been a bit of increased interest in bird watching. And so I guess that's a really exciting thing. And I'm counting myself as a newbie there. And I've also started to kind of talk to other friends who are all starting to come out of the woodwork, that they also went through something similar. So yeah, I think that it's really exciting to see the birdwatching community grow, and I'm really excited about the diversity and the variety of voices in our community as well. And that will, I think that diversity has helped, during this time. It's grown a bit, but that's all anecdotal. So I try not to claim things that I don't know, but anecdotally I can see there's some interest. And I recently interviewed the amazing people behind the Sydney Bird Club. Shout out to them. If you haven't seen them on Facebook or Twitter and you're in Sydney, check them out. And they're incredible. And they've just set up this very simple bird watching club for Sydney where everyone's welcome at any ability or any cultural background. And that's emerged over the last few years as well due to demand. So, and they like to combine their bird watching with beers and other fun things. So, they keep it casual. So I've heard lots of stories like that since I've started, recording this podcast.
That's great. I'm always looking to take a positive, and with the whole lockdowns that we had in Melbourne in particular being so long, starting earlier than the rest of the country, and certainly on a par with only two or three other cities in the world for the length of time that we were confined. I was really encouraged by how people's attention was diverted into neighbourhood and the assets in the neighbourhood. Whether we had the 5K or the 10K limit, people were walking around and then going on social media saying, "Guess what I just saw?" and I think certainly in my area, people started taking ownership of the road verges and things like that. I noticed people picking up litter and things which, in the earlier times was, we'll wait for someone from the council or from whatever to do that. But no, people then were becoming proud of their community assets. And I think I hope, again, it's only anecdotal, no one's done a study on it, but they started appreciating the birds around them. And that's evident. Twitter tells me that every day now, that people, and with the technology we've got, taking a photo with their phone and then going, "Hey, bird Twitter, what's this?" Yeah. I love it. I love people getting turned onto it.
Yeah, me too. And I'm talking to someone who is helping to support the peregrine falcons that live at the top of Collins Street in Melbourne. And they've got 30,000 people in their Facebook group following along, and everyone's getting really excited that nests are being, built and eggs are being laid. And interest has never been so high as it has over the last few years, just around these birds of prey that live on the top of a city building. So yeah, there's a lot to be excited about, and there's a lot of really exciting things going on, a lot of excited people like me.
And I'll just acknowledge, thanks for that Facebook love there, Katie Anderson, and Joan as well. Got a thumbs up on Facebook. Thank you. Can you remember the exact point? Like, was there an exact point or event where you stopped seeing birds and actually began watching birds? I'm sure you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I'm sure this actually happened way before this memory. I go on a lot of walks with my amazing folks who are still with us, and they have been bird watching. That has been something that they've always been bird nerds, and they've always been nature nerds, but it's actually something they've really leaned into in their retirement. And as part of that, I got quite impatient. We'd be walking in the bush and I'd be like, "Come on, I want to, keep up the pace." And of course, they were really slow, and slowly they got me noticing birds. And I guess the one that's most memorable is being in these wetlands. When I walk in the forest, one of my favorite things about being in a forest is I find it quite humbling. I like the fact that I'm surrounded by this incredible ecosystem that also goes on way after I leave. It existed before I lived, and it will hopefully live for much longer than after I die. And there's something very humbling about being in nature, whether it's standing on a beach or standing in a forest. And so often my experiences in nature are that, like, I'm in the awe of the ecosystem that I'm part of. When I went to my wetlands, there aren't as many trees. And so actually you start to scan the horizon more. And it was in 2020 where I saw Latham snipe for the first time in my wetland, although they've been there a long time in the local wetland. And I went home and I looked them up and went, what is this crazy bird that I just saw? And then I heard about their journey, you know, flying all the way from Japan to Australia. And again, this is stuff that I have learnt in my job. This is stuff that I've been spoken to and taught by my parents, but that's when that penny dropped for me. And I think it was because I was in this amazing windswept landscape, but I wasn't being fully awed out by nature. That was that moment where I could really tune in. And that was probably the Latham snipe was the first bird that I really noticed, as in paid attention to, and had that moment where I'm like, holy cracker, I'm living next to this incredible ecosystem, literally a block away. And there's so much I can learn about those birds. So I guess, you know, thank you, Latham snipe, for doing that. I went from like, wow, that bird's real pretty, to, oh my goodness, this bird's incredible and it's flown such a long way and it's living in this wetland that's right near me. So that's probably a moment where things changed for me.
And what was the point of time there? Like, was that alongside the sort of beginning of the lockdowns, or was this in 2018 or?
Yeah, it was just before. So it was in February 2020. So I guess that was that moment where I got really curious. And I also, I brought back a couple of bird nerds in my life and they absolutely lost it. I went, oh my God, it's Latham snipes and they're so clear and we can see them. I'm like, oh, actually, this is a big deal. Okay, yeah. Cool. I get it now. So,
Tell me a bit about, because I love snipe and they're so difficult to see clearly, as your friends would have said. Yeah. Did you flush them, or did you come across them and they were just going about their business on the fringes of the water?
Yeah. So I've worked in wildlife conservation education for the last 4 years. And as part of that, I've really had my education in ethics and understanding how to live beside animals, and also how to respect animals, and also how to understand welfare in animals. And so as part of that, I'm definitely not a flusher, and I am probably a bit more hardcore than some in my approach to bird watching because of that. But no, they are just sitting on their nests. So it's very viewable. I won't say where, obviously, because we want to make sure we protect our bird friends a little bit, but they're definitely living in those wetlands and you can see them from a path. So they're just hanging out. And
I have to clarify about flushing. The times that I've seen snipe have been when I'm walking somewhere and they've just gone bang like quail. I've almost stepped on them, had no idea they were there. I'm walking somewhere,
gotcha.
And bang, out they go. Yeah. So
that's, you can tell I'm a newbie. I'm still even learning what that means. So thank you for the clarification.
Yeah.
Still learning, got my training wheels on.
Yeah. That's a really good point that you bring up. I mean, it's something I cover a lot about ethics, particularly with photography on my show. There's just no need, especially with the equipment we've got nowadays. You can get close to birds without being close to birds. You don't have to be on top of them. You don't need to be chasing them down. You don't need to be upsetting them. You don't need to be a negative influence in their life to get a good look at a bird. So
yeah, and it's so great you bring that up, Grant. As part of creating this podcast, I've been talking to some of the most incredible minds, I think, in the bird watching community, and speaking to BirdLife about their guidelines, and speaking to photographers who have got really good ethical guidelines on their website as well. Something that's made me really think about is how do you kind of keep yourself in check and other people in check? So something that I was doing really early on when I was bird watching is I had the calls quite loud, because I was trying to do that matchy thing, where you're like, right, is that especially when you first started out and every little brown bird looks the same, and one of the only ways you might be able to identify them is by their call. So it's been cool to think about that and learn from that and be accountable. And so I've been turning my calls right down, only so I can just gently hear them, or just becoming familiar with them before I go out bird watching. And I've realized there are some practices that I've done that actually, especially as a beginner bird watcher, I haven't really thought it through properly. I've just been so hooked on the curiosity and you become quite determined to want to know what that bird is, especially when you start out, and it's really hard when you first start out. So just keeping myself accountable now a bit more. So it's been really useful to hear that and to think about, where do I draw the line personally. But yeah, the snipes, amazing.
Can I be a bit of a smart ass now?
I don't think you ever need permission from that. I'm a long time listener, first time caller, Grant.
Okay. If you are someone like Kirsty who likes to do the playback and the analysis and going, am I sure? Okay. This little thing cost me $3 online, and it plugs into the bottom of the phone and whatnot. And these things have a thing, and on the end of the thing, there's a thing, and it plugs into the thing. Hang on, come back here. And then this here, the thing, plugs into the thing.
Yeah.
Right.
And if you don't want to carry those big things, every phone comes with tiny little things.
The ones that you and I are both wearing now. Yeah. So that's right. Yeah. So I mean, if I'm ever going to be a bastard in life, that's the kind of time where I'll be a bastard. I recently saw somebody with one of those Bluetooth speakers that, you can get them with like to take them down the beach, and you put them around your neck. It's like and they look like a bag, or even they double as a bag. I saw someone with one of those recently in a park, tormenting birds, and I wasn't polite at all in my approach to them, and I basically hounded them out of the place because, I've said it a million times. I don't know if I said it to you when I spoke to you for your show, but it's the same as someone coming to your house at 4:00 in the morning and bashing on your front door, and then running around the house and bashing on all your windows, shouting at you. It's essentially the same thing. So don't do it, please. Please don't do it.
Look, I probably have a more gentle approach to you. But yes, I believe we've got to keep ourselves and keep each other accountable. And I was walking recently in a bushland where someone was up real close taking a photograph of a nest, and we just had a gentle conversation about how maybe that may not be a great thing. So sometimes people are educated and make different decisions. Some people haven't thought about it before. Some people have. So I think it's really up to the birdwatching community to keep ourselves accountable. And the great news is there's so much support out there where you can get real educated, and then you can still have a freaking great time birdwatching.
That's right.
So it doesn't ruin it. It's still awesome. But
just go and have a good time. And the birds are not yours. They're not yours like your kitten is yours. That's the point I want to get. People have this sense of entitlement that they're here, and especially people who make a trip to go somewhere. Well, I'm here. I've got to see the bird, so I've got to be able to do this. No, you don't. Yeah. It'll be nice if you see the bird. That'll be marvelous, but don't upset the bird. It's not your pet. Leave it be. That's
exactly. And I think as a beginner, you can definitely, like, I could feel myself going on walks where I'd get really excited.
Yeah.
Like I'd look on eBird at all the potential birds that I could see, and I'd set up my expectations. It's all part of that learning curve. And you soon realize that actually, if you set your expectations, one, you don't get mindful, you're not present in the environment you're in. You're not just loving the rosella that you're looking at, or you're not loving the wattlebird you're looking at. You're not admiring a black swan up close with your binoculars. So there has to be I think something that I have learned as a beginner, and I think other beginners would probably testify to this, is just about being able to go out and seeing what's there and just being there, and what you see, and not getting excited too much about the potential that you can see a new bird. It might be kicking around, it may not, but
That's right.
Try not to set the bar real high.
and don't get me wrong, folks. There's nothing wrong with the bird orgasm, right? We've all been there. I don't believe it, right? But just be nice, and when you're being mindful too, be mindful where you put your feet when you're walking around too, because there's critters down there, and there's and don't break branches, all those kind of things. Yeah. When you've been out for a nice day in the bush, the forest, the beach, the scrub, wherever it is, it's really nice if no one actually knows that you've ever been there. That's the beautiful thing. Yeah. But yeah, bird orgasms. When's the last time you had a bird orgasm, Kirsty?
I feel like we're getting real personal here, Grant, and I feel like I now know too much about you. But look, the last time I got really excited about a bird was, I have been trying to find a red-cap robin for ages, and they're kicking around Melbourne a bit. And I went and looked at some of the most obvious places, and like a beginner bird watcher, just had to set up my expectations. And then a couple of weekends ago, I was up in Bendigo at Greater Bendigo National Park around Kamarooka, and such an amazing place to visit. And sure enough, there was a couple of red-cap robins, and then I turned around and there was a shy heath wren, which was one of the loudest birds I've ever heard. So that made me laugh, that a shy heath wren is so loud. And then I also saw a western whistler. So I think that was all in one spot. And I guess it's really funny, talking to some of my guests on the Weekend Birder, they get really jealous because I'm a beginner. And also I discovered bird watching officially during a lockdown period. I haven't been to Queensland yet as a birder. I've been to Queensland and I've walked through the forest, but I haven't been as a birder. I've only been to a couple of states. I haven't been over to WA yet. There's a whole birding world out there that I'm yet to discover. And so, I can get 3 lifers just by going up to Bendigo. So I know that this is a precious time that I won't have again. So I'm enjoying every minute. But that was the last time that I got very excited as a birder. Seeing 3 lifers in one spot, what a treat.
I was going to suggest, if you're looking for a red-cap robin, that's where you should go. Just head out towards Bendigo, and they're out there. And the beautiful thing about the red-cap robin is that you're just as likely to be walking around. If you're visiting someone, you're just as likely to be walking around, and then you'll turn around and it's sitting on a fence post.
Yeah.
Amazing experience. That heath wren, very good get there.
It was exciting. And I also love bird colours. I mean, I was with a couple of people who were bird watching and a couple of people that were just bird noticing. And someone made the comment that red-cap robins look like they're exercising in the 80s. They've got a lot of fluoro going on. It's a real, get out. And
they got the hyper colour on. Yeah.
Yeah, they got the hyper colour on. It's a real fluoro look. Really, really rocking it. So big ups to the red-cap robin.
Yeah, that's what I always think whenever I see lorikeets. I think, you're still wearing your hyper colour, fair grow up, fellas. And if for those watching or listening, if you don't know what a hypercolour t-shirt is, one of the very few things from the 80s and maybe the 90s, did they live on into the 90s? That
I do believe they did, yeah. I had a Beverly Hills 90210 hypercolour socks, so that dates it in early 90s, I think.
Yeah, so they were certainly a thing in the 80s when I was a teenager. And look, was I a teenager? I think I might have been a bit more than a teenager in the 80s. But yeah, that's one of the things that I wish everyone could still enjoy, like the big Charlie. But
it'll be back. Everything comes back. Just give it time.
Right. Well, That's right. No, that's right. We're not seeing any new movies, so why would it be different? Now let me pull this discussion back online. We know a bit about now your beginning journey with bird watching, but podcasting. I mean, it's something that I obviously love being a podcaster, and I've podcasted about different things over time, and I probably dived into podcasts about 2010, maybe. I reckon I first listened to them, and about 2012 was pretty hardcore. When did you discover podcasts, and what were the first kind of podcasts that you were a devotee of?
It's a great question. I first discovered my first podcast was This American Life. And it's because I love stories. I learn a lot through stories. In fact, it's pretty hilarious that I'm doing a science podcast when I gave up science in Year 10 at school. And now I work as a science educator, and I also am a climate reality leader and talk about climate science. So go figure. But I think the reason why is because at school I wasn't engaged in a textbook and a one word answer. I liked the story. I liked the journey. I liked open-endedness of it all. And so, yeah, This American Life was introduced to me by my brother, and it just the stories, the fact that I could access all of these stories on demand was pretty amazing. And I think looking at my podcast collection now, it's like my music taste, it's super eclectic. So either I'm in the mood for a comedy podcast because I don't want to think about the world too much and I just want to laugh and listen to an interesting conversation, through to, I'm a bit of a nerd for ABC podcasts. So I love Conversations with Richard Feidler, and I love anything that Anne Jones pumps out. So I've become a bit of a nerd that way as well. And I also I have a couple of favorite podcast guests that I like who do the podcast circuit. So I'll have a little search for them and listen to them as well. I love the audio medium. And when TV arrived and the internet arrived, they said radio was dead. And I love that it's not. I love that podcasts and radio still kick on. And there is something about my imagination that gets really activated when I'm listening to podcasts in a way that, is not fully illustrated to me like it is when I'm watching TV. So, I'm become a real podcast nerd, and I like that medium. And part of the Weekend Birder is to make it really short and bite-sized pieces, because when you are learning, as part of being a trained teacher, I know all about metacognition and cognitive load and how there's only so much information we can store at once. And it's fine when you're a bit of a pro or you've heard a bit of it before, but when you're really learning off fresh, sort of 15 to 20 minutes is probably the maximum that your brain can handle. So it's been interesting thinking about all the different formats and different podcasts. But I really like this podcast, and I'm not saying that to be a suck. I do love bird podcasts like yours, Grant, and I really appreciate the time and the effort and the energy. Never have I appreciated that since doing my own, of how much work goes into a podcast. You just don't grab a mic and go, everyone. Not that I thought that I was going to be that way, but yeah, anyone who has a podcast gets my respect, because it's a labor of love, and often not a paid labor of love as well.
Yeah, and someone who at one stage I was producing 6 podcasts at a time. And the stats tell you, the wonderful Daniel J. Lewis, with his research into all the podcasts of the world over many years, most podcasts don't make it past 7 episodes. If you make it past 7, you can probably call yourself a podcaster, but you don't actually have an alive podcast really until you've got to about 50. And virtually very, very few podcasts make it to 100. So it's a lot less work now than it was. There's tools out there now that make a lot of the tasks that you have to do easier, but that has pros and cons, because there's an awful lot of shit podcasts, which I don't mind, because if people are listening to shit podcasts and then they find a good one, they stay with the good one. Which is, but that sort of leads me to discovering podcasts. how do you find new podcasts? What are the methods? And are there any tools or platforms or whatever that you use to find new podcasts?
Great question. Like word of mouth for me is always the win. So I'm always asking people, what should I listen to? You know, it's always like the, what have you been listening to? What are you watching? What have you seen? Sort of conversation you have over, you know, dinner and lunch with mates. So word of mouth's huge. As I said, I'm a huge supporter of the ABC and I consume a lot of ABC content. And so I have a couple of ABC newsletters that I'm subscribed to, which kind of keep me in the loop of that as well. And Twitter is, you know, a really fantastic resource. I also am part of a couple of really amazing Facebook groups for bird watching. So if you aren't that and you are a bird watcher and you are on Facebook, have a look. There's some really active, dynamic, amazing communities on Facebook and they share their stuff as well. So that's been amazing. And then sometimes it's Googling, you know, like I Googled recently a bird species that I didn't know much about. And then I found a podcast through that. So, yeah, it's been all a bit serendipitous, but you're right. There's so many amazing podcasts out there. And I'm so glad for that because we all have different tastes and needs. And it's just great that it's not homogenized. So I like the power of that.
Yeah, it's the thing I've always loved about podcasts is that you can be going through and say you do want to find something about, I don't know, gemstone fossicking. Well, there might be 50 podcasts and you know that out of the 50, 45 of them are not going to appeal to you, but you'll find 5 that you reckon are fantastic, you know. And then maybe, you know, you were following a guest around, you know, if there's guests that you like or personalities that you like, you can check them out on all the podcasts. I mean, it's very much like why YouTube is successful too. I think that you can what is it? Know, like, and trust. You can know, like, and trust the people that you follow, or you can poke fun at them. But that's always a lot of fun too.
I love I just am really grateful of living in 2022 where little old Kirsty Costa can start her own podcast. And I have an education and a communications background. So I've got a little leg up in terms of how I can run it. But, you know, I'm a believer in visibility of people and of active citizen voice. And there are definitely some dark parts to all of this, but I do love that people can be visible. And I mean, I've been so privileged to start recording this podcast because I get to talk to the most incredible people and they say yes, and then I can share their knowledge and their stories and their skills with people. I mean, what a privilege that is, and how incredible that we have the tech that allows us to do that. That for me is mind-blowing. I mean, it's a totally different reality to 10 years ago in a lot of ways. You know, I was talking to a friend today about, you know, the evolution of the phone and how, like, if someone had told me 15 years ago that you'd be able to carry around the internet and, you know, a camera and everything else in your pocket, I'd be like, not a thing. Yep, thanks very much. But, you know, here we are. So, you know, I'm very grateful that we can all have a voice and that many people can add to a dialogue that isn't just dominated by one set of media. That's really amazing that people can have their voice and they can make choices about who they want to listen to. What a treat. You know, what a world to live in my mind.
Again, dating myself, Kirsty, but I was trying to produce podcasts or even before I knew how to do podcasts, but when having 512 megabytes of storage was an absolute luxury, right? That was like, oh my God, I've got a 30 megabyte file. That's massive. And look at what we can do now. You know, it's just stunning. I mean, I've got these little 4 terabyte drives just sitting on my desk. That would have, you know, Melbourne Uni would have been paying $500,000 for that capacity. You know, it's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah, accessibility. What a game changer. Yeah, it's great.
So, tell me about becoming the decision to start a podcast. Did you suffer from that well-worn phrase, the imposter syndrome. Did you and ah about it for a long time before you actually leapt in and recorded something?
Yeah, I guess I give everything careful consideration. I'm a bit known for that, but when I started out bird watching, because I couldn't hang out with people at the time, I went searching for support, and so I found some incredible books. I found a couple of really good podcasts, although the podcasts I was listening to sometimes were well above my knowledge because I was beginner. People would get into the nitty gritty of the science, and it just lost me. And then I found a couple of good YouTube videos, and I found some really good websites, but there was nothing really that really introduced me to the birdwatching community and also allowed me to learn from them like a mentor, I guess. And so I guess that passion and commitment to want to support other beginner and intermediate birdwatchers, to have that, started to override my imposter syndrome. And I've been lucky to do quite a bit of leadership training in my life. And so once I can see that there's a need for something, then I kind of can push forward and do it. But where I'm not is I'm not a scientist. As I said, I gave up science in year 10. I'm an educator and I'm a trainer and I'm a communicator and I'm a teacher. So really my job is to get the experts in the room to share their knowledge and not be an expert myself. And so I know that in the incredible birdwatching community, people can get really involved in the science and the correct science. And I really appreciate that. So I've mentally prepared myself for the fact that when I start to release my podcast, some of my experts may not share correct science. And I'm sure everyone on social media will let us know what the science is. But I ask everyone to go gently, because really what this is about sharing our stories and sharing our knowledge and sharing our advice, and leaning into that experience rather than always getting it, like nailing it at 100%. And other thing I've learned about science is that it is contested sometimes. And so I want to share a bit of that too, that actually different people got different perspectives and understandings of science. But yeah, so I guess I'm not claiming to be an expert, so I don't have to feel like an imposter. I'm definitely a learner, and everyone who's listening is probably a learner too. So we're all in it together. We're relying on our guests to help us out.
Definitely. I mean, a lot of people, when they're thinking of starting a podcast, you first got to understand what a podcast is. And look, it's so easy now. I mean, anyone who's got a YouTube channel calls himself a podcaster now, and that's, not strictly true. And there's different things that appeal to the visual side of what we do and to just the plain audio side. But people obsess over gear and do I have a good enough computer and all that. And look, if you got a phone, do it. Just talk into it. If you got something to say it. And true in our field, and I can lay claim to being an applied scientist, but I'm by no means an expert. But yeah, in all of this field, you can find a research paper that's been published to support what you want to support, and that leads to discussion, which is what I would think. What, from my point of view, that's what getting into this field is about: promoting discussion, prodding, getting some opinion, and making people think. You're nicer in style than me, Kirsty.
Well, I'm an ex-primary school teacher, Grant. So if I had your style, it probably wouldn't have lasted very long in my career. So,
miss. Kirsty, what have you learned about yourself by having to actually think about producing podcasts? Because good podcasts, you have to think about what you're going to say, and you're going to think about how you lead your guest or your other contributors to what they're going to say. So you've had a really good background as a communicator already, and obviously communicating with little people as well as older people. So you're highly skilled in this field already. But has the intimacy of audio delivery as a podcaster taught you anything about yourself?
Yeah. Yeah, a lot. Hey, I think when you start any creative project, and I'm sure anyone who's listening who's an artist or a writer or a anything where you have to kind of put a bit of your own self into it, you become very aware of your values. So something that I have been reminded of is how awe and wonderment is one of the things that I really value, and same with curiosity. And so the questions that I ask my guests are often around like, you know, awe and wonder and curious moments. I also I'm a big proponent of inclusivity, and so making sure that the diverse voices of the birdwatching community are represented is really important to me. In fact, I even have a statement on inclusive and diverse, and diversity on my website. So I guess the moment I'm launching this podcast in 3 weeks, and it's a nervous moment for me because I am going to speak who I am and be very vulnerable in that way to people, because all the decisions I've made and the guests I'm talking to and the questions I'm asking all come from a pretty authentic place where my values are. And something that I've learned is also that that there are just amazing people out there with incredible stories, and every time I speak to anyone, I'm just blown away by their story. I mean, Grant, you feature on this podcast, and you sharing some of like the question of like, how did you get into bird watching is such a simple one, but so many stories come out from that. And and then as a bird watcher, I guess what I've learned is how important bird watching is to me. So I am very open in the fact that I all my life I grew up with some significant health issues that has led to some health anxiety that kicks around, and you can imagine over the last few years has had some interesting peak moments. And when I'm feeling anxious, I go into nature and I bird watch, and I calm right down. In fact, every year I have to have a significant medical scan. That means I have to go into an MRI machine, and I'm a bit claustrophobic and it freaks me out. I even have to get sedated. And last year I went to the Royal Park wetlands and I bird watched for an hour because my MRI was delayed. And when I rocked up to the hospital, I almost didn't need the sedation. I was so chilled. And so what I've learned about bird watching is that mental health gift that it gives, as well as the awe and wonderment and the connection to nature and the connection to country, is so strong, more than I ever knew. And I can't imagine my life without it now. And yeah, that's been incredible to be able to discover that. It's the best mental health practice I've ever done. And I've tried a lot of different mental health practices over the lifetime that I've had. So yeah, what a discovery, what a treat and a gift to have that, and to be able to show other people that. And also quite a few people in that I've interviewed shared some of their one of the reasons they birdwatch is that feeling of peace and calm, and how important that is. So yeah. And also I've learned all the tech stuff, so that's been fun too.
A couple of things. Yes, dear listener and viewer, I am a guest on the first runs of Kirsty's show, so I do tell a story that I don't think I've told on my on my podcast. So we'll hold that back so that people can listen. And you're talking to quite different people to me because our shows have got a different focus. But Kirsty, this is just for you. Hold your breath. Breathe.
Right.
We've both been in those machines many times.
Yeah, I mean, it is incredible. There's so many different ways that people come to bird watching and come to spending time in nature. And I love that. I love that there is just everyone's got a story to tell around it. And then, in the podcast, I get to learn the most coolest stuff. I didn't realize actually that in the end it's becoming a bit of a selfish project because I'm learning so much about birds along with my listeners. And that's been so cool. Everyone's got their own little bit of knowledge, and so many people I've approached, they like, it takes me a little while to convince them to come on the podcast because they say I've got nothing to offer. And then you think I could build a whole podcast on your knowledge alone. So and everyone's
got a story.
Everyone's got a story and everyone's got knowledge that can be shared. So it's very cool.
Kirsty, now when you park your car somewhere, that maybe you haven't been to Forest Hill Chase for a while, or you've had to go and visit someone at Sunbury and you pull up somewhere.
Yeah.
Do you instantly, instead of worrying if you're on the right street or whatever, do you instantly look around and go, "Oh, is that a musk lorikeet?" Oh.
I am that person. In fact, I'm that person that when I've got people in the car on a country road, I'm pulling over by the side of the road. Look at that. What's that up there?
Yep,
I'm totally
that's
that
me.
person. And I have learned with bird watching, which I'm sure lots of bird watchers have learnt too, that actually you think I'm just going to go into this amazing forest and I'm going to see all these birds, and you get out of the car and they're all in the car park. And you walk into the forest and there's not that many birds there, and you come back to the car park and they're all there. So I've learnt that a lot of birds are in the car park.
Well, and birds are curious creatures.
Yeah.
Many birds are very curious and very intelligent, and they actually want the interaction, provided that you are not, forcing yourself in that they will be on the fringe of the car park and checking you out. Obviously, yes, bird watchers, yes, some of them are very, very shy and retiring, but no, just about anywhere you can go and find some birds if you don't really mind what birds you are interacting with. So
Yeah.
so get out there. Get out there. So, Kirsty, tell me what birds have taught you recently, like with this new found appreciation of the birds around you.
Yeah.
Have they taught you anything at all?
It's a really hard question. I feel like I've been taught by nature since I was born. And I think what birds have reminded me is that everything is connected. And the other thing that I guess I've been reminded of, even though it's part of my job and I think about it all the time, is when you become a bird watcher and you have kind of discovered the birds in your local area, and, you've sort of, like, for me, I've seen a lot of birds now in my local area, and I'm starting to get curious about the birds further afield. I get out a map of Victoria where I live, and I look for the places where I could go bird watching, and I see these tiny little green patches on a big map. And I think not only have birds reminded me about how everything's interconnected, they've also reminded me that there's no surprise there's a whole lot of them there, because it's a concentrated area. Where there's actually still some remnant bushland or still some remnant mallee, or there's an ecosystem that they can thrive in. And talking to some urban ecologists, I've been delightfully surprised to hear about how some birds do really well to thrive alongside people in our urban areas. And, we see them every day. And I'm really grateful for that. And also, I look on that map and there's not that much green where there should have been green. So I guess bird watching has again tuned me into how important conservation is, how important protecting wildlife and protecting habitats is, because when you become a bird watcher and you start to think about where to go, actually your choices are limited because of what we've done and what we can do to revegetate and rehabilitate the land and do better care for country. So yeah, I guess that's what bird watching has reminded me of and continues to teach me about, which is how precious these ecosystems are and how amazing these birds are. And and also I love that birds have got lots of different personalities. I love that. They've all got a different way of communicating. They've all got a different way of behaving. They are their own individuals. And even that you can see, like people kind of have this maybe homogenized version of like what a magpie looks at like. But when you start to look at magpies, you start to realize actually that they all look a little bit different. That concept of not just a group, but an individual. I love that as well. And it's made me really appreciate animals in a different way, that they're not just magpies. They're all individual magpies all hanging out together. Everyone's got their own funky personality and they're all talking to each other in a different way. And yeah, so that's been good too. So lots of lessons.
3 of our black and white birds have got amazingly big personalities. Magpies have got big personalities if you watch them. Willy wagtails have got very big personalities.
Yeah.
And the magpie lark / mudlark / peewee, they have got very big personalities too.
Yeah.
If you take the time to look at them and watch them rather than go, oh, a bird. Oh, look at that bird. I'm, I'm always amazed when I see people who will see even a gull, a silver gull, and they don't actually know it's a gull. They go, "Oh, look at the birds," and because it's such a ubiquitous species, I'm thinking, how have you gone through 30 or 40 years of your life and you don't know that that's a gull? I don't know, but that's just me, I guess. Kirsty, I'm going to ask you a really hard question. What's your favourite bird? Have you got to that stage yet where you have a favourite?
Oh, it's like trying to choose your favourite child, right? It's not an easy thing. At the moment, I have got the golden whistler as my ringtone. And when I go out into the habitats around my house, I can hear them because my ear is now so tuned to both the melody and the pitch that they sing. And they're beautiful, bright yellow feathers on the male and the beautiful soft brown on the female. And I have a real appreciation for the golden whistler. I also I had a chance to visit the Western Treatment Plant, which is the bird mecca of Melbourne, and seeing brolgas for the first time will always be imprinted on my memory. I think a lot of people have had that experience too. Everyone talks about their first brolga. So from the little birds to the big birds, that's freaking amazing to see brolgas. And I'm really grateful for that amazing habitat that they get to live in. So they're two of my favorites at the moment. But I have some family connections. So my grandfather was a mad Collingwood football supporter, and Collingwood Football Club have the magpies as their emblem. And when I was... Sorry, you go.
Floriat Pica as the club sort of saying, or what is it, motto. So fear the magpie. There we are. Fear the
magpie. I feel like magpies are some of the most misunderstood birds in our Australian society, especially when they're nesting. And I just love them, and my grandfather loved them too, as part of his love for his footy team, but also his love of nature. And I guess, look, I was destined to become a bird watcher because when my other grandfather passed away, he left to me his pair of binoculars and his What Bird Is That book. And that was quite a few years ago now. Pardon?
Neville Cayley, what a book.
What a book. And in it is my grandfather's podiatrist card and a very well bent page on the spotted pardalote. So I guess when I think of my family, I think of the magpie for my papa and the spotted pardalote for my grandfather. And, what two incredible birds. So, yeah, I could go on all day. We could have a full podcast on the birds that Kirsty loves.
Good.
But there's some meaningful ones for me, and then there's some ones that just fascinate me as well.
We could have a whole podcast on your favourite bird book stories too.
Yeah.
I bought a second-hand copy of What Bird Is That when I was about 12, and it was about probably 20 years or 30 years old then. So I love that book. There's beautiful. Now, I only want to now, Kirsty, is to ask you about how people can consume your show, and tell us a little bit about what people will find when you release the episodes. What day are you putting the first lot out?
The first lot is coming out in mid-September, so stay tuned. I'm just finishing off a few things now to get them ready. It's basically it's basically sharing the knowledge and stories, advice of the birdwatching community. And in it, I talk to lots of different people. So I talk to people who are urban ecologists and ornithologists and total experts in birds, through to the people who look after a local bushland reserve, or people who are artists who are really inspired by birds, who give us their advice on how to notice birds and their feathers and their beaks. So, and yeah, as I said, you know, a neuropsychologist explaining the mindfulness of bird watching, but also some real basics like how to use a pair of binoculars, how to listen for bird calls, how to use eBird, how to read a bird book, some of the real basics, what to pack when you're going out in the bush, that sort of thing as well. So, and I'm joined by the lovely Georgia Angus, who wrote a great book called 100 Australian Birds, released in 2020. Yes. And she is going to share with us some of the excerpts from her really delightful book along the podcast as well to help us get really educated about birds. So, yeah, it's a really fun ride. And I think I've had 35 guests say yes. So it's going to go for a while. We'll definitely push past the initial 9 podcast rule. What did you say it was, Grant?
7. Well,
7.
I think when we spoke, you'd already cracked 7. So, are you at the point where you can drop some names?
Yeah. So, besides Georgia, we're going to speak to Alex Maisie, who is part of the Sherbrooke Lyrebird Study Group and an incredible knowledge about superb lyrebirds. We're going to talk to of course, being put on my spot, I can't remember any of the names. Talk to Victor Hurley, who's our peregrine falcon expert. We're going to talk to the amazing Peter Murphy, who is part of BirdLife, leads the BirdLife Mornington Peninsula group and also is part of the Friends of Edith Vale and Seaford Wetlands. And then we're talking to incredible urban ecologists as well. So it's a real treat. Big shout out to Ricky Coughlin as well, who's our little brown birds expert up in Sydney, and also Tom Hunt, who's giving us some advice around bird-friendly gardens. And Tom's based in Adelaide and is currently actually working out in the desert on a desert project as part of his work as well. So there's a real combination of people, but we talk really simple science, and it's all bite-sized pieces, and it's, you know, a bit of story with a bit of science with a bit of advice. So easily digestible. And it's particularly, I had in my mind, beginner and intermediate bird watchers who just want that extra support. But hilariously, a lot of the experts I'm speaking to, I can't wait to listen to it because they want to hear more from the birdwatching community as well, and just hear more about the stories of the people who are part of the community that they belong to, including your fine self, Grant. So, yeah, it's really exciting, and I can't wait to share it with everyone. If people jump on weekendbirder.com, that's the website, which is soon we'll be hosting all the episodes, but you can find links to our social media if you want to jump on there and, you know, be the first to know when it goes live. And there'll be an episode every week. So a little morsel of deliciousness to consume every week in the bird world.
And of course, I'll link to it. I'll update and everything after it's live. That's Kirsty's Twitter handle there at Birdapod too, that you can see it. It's really exciting for me to see that new Australian bird content is getting out there, and it's fab that we've got a couple of the same people that we've spoken to. I mean, now Ricky's a 2-time guest on the Bird Emergency now, so that she's getting up there. But it's also great to see that there is a really wide range of voices that you can get into if you're into birds and nature generally in Australia. And it's nice. I remember one of the reasons I started the Bird Emergency was there were no Australian voices doing podcasts in this field. It was all US and a few UK things. So, but now the world's opened up. African and Asian bird podcasts, and now a new Australian one. Who should listen, Kirsty? Like, should any birder listen, or have you really crafted it? I'm interested in where you think the cutoff point is. Obviously, it's real newbies, but it's it's really anyone who's going to sling some binoculars around their neck and go for a walk, isn't it?
Yeah, and I definitely, as I said, I'm a newbie and I'm picking up little tips along the way that I didn't learn when I first started. So people might find that they can sharpen their skills or pick up a little tidbit of knowledge as well. And I think they just really appreciate hearing all of the different people who belong to the birdwatching community as well. I've also got quite a few friends who are wild bird curious, wild bird lovers, and they're pretty excited about listening to it as well. So you don't have to be a bird watcher to listen to it, because it really is it's as much about people as it is about birds and science and advice. It's a bit of both. And that's what makes our bird watching community so special. It's that wonderful combination of people and nature coming together to hang out. So yeah, I think a lot of people will hopefully enjoy it.
I was stealing that phrase, "bird curious." I think that can be applied to many situations. So we'll grab that one. So mid September. So have you picked a day that you're dropping? Like, are you going to go? Are you a Monday show, or are you going to be like a Wednesday show? Or
yeah, look, I could get really corny because the Weekend Birder has a little logo that is a superb fairy wren, which, yes, I am a one-woman show. I drew myself, and I'm a terrible drawer. So
no, it's a good logo.
Everyone will have a giggle at that.
It's a good logo.
But I think I'll probably end up dropping them on Wednesdays because you know,
Wednesday. So
yeah, because you can't avoid a pun, right? Who can avoid a pun? Puns are the best.
Exactly. So look, I'm tipping. Look out for it on the 14th of September, which is a Wednesday.
It is a Wednesday, yeah. And
you can't really get more in the middle of September than on Wednesday the 5th, Wednesday the 14th. So
yeah, it's coming soon. And the reason why I'm not fully committing to a date is I'm new at this, right? So I'm still figuring it out. So
that's right. There's still work to do. Hey, and look, the rules are, Kirsty, the rules are there are no rules, right? So don't I mean, you know how to look after yourself in terms of all the self-care stuff and whatnot, but it's only a guideline. Put them out when they're ready. Put them out when you're happy with them, and people will pick them up, because most people won't listen on the day that you release them. They'll find them over the weeks and months to go, and they'll be excited by the new bird podcast. And, I found Kirsty and she's amazing. I love her. And then they'll stalk you on the socials.
Look, I'm just really happy that I know this sounds really corny and modest, but it is actually true. If one person listens to my podcast and they feel like a more confident birder, or they feel like that they can relate to the people who are there listening to, then I really do feel like job done, because that's what I was missing when I was a beginner birder in that way. So, yeah, if that one person is happy and shares that with me, well, then I'll give that a big tick and I'll be pretty happy about that. It's also been a joy talking to people who don't normally get interviewed on podcasts. Like they're really excited and they've told all their family and friends that they're going to be on their very first podcast. And I love bringing visibility to people and giving them their chance to be able to speak and share and tell their stories. And that's been really amazingly awesome. So even just having created this and giving them that opportunity to feel valued for what they know and what they've experienced, then that's freaking amazing. It makes me so happy.
Definitely fellow travellers there, Kirsty. There's nothing like the joy of sharing someone else's knowledge and expertise. That's what I love. And hey, just one convert at a time. You build the wall one brick at a time. That's all it is. Let's just give, if you want to drop a comment or ask a question, this is your final opportunity before we wave Kirsty off into the afternoon, evening. It's almost dinner time around here. So, yeah. Kirsty, I'll just tell you, just be prepared for the amount of people around the world who will start following you on the socials, and certainly bird Twitter and bird world generally, I think is a really supportive place. And apart from a couple, idiots jumping into your stream and going, oh, or people trying to flog your cryptocurrency, I I can't point to one negative other than how much time it takes, because you love it so much and you want to interview everyone you possibly can. And then you go, oh my God, look at all the things I've got to do. So
that's good advice, Grant. I'm really grateful to be a new member of the birdwatching community, and just like the teaching community, which is an incredible education, is an amazing sector to work in. Wildlife conservation sector is full of incredible humans. I stumbled upon this community. It's full of incredible humans too. So I look forward to chatting with people and sharing people's stories and hearing from people online. And yeah, I just really looking forward to being able to talk more birdie stuff. So yeah, bring it on.
There we are. Thanks, Katie. Look at that, listening from Lake Erie in Pennsylvania. How's the pollution in Lake Erie at the moment, Katie? And are the loons active at the moment? That's my big question for you. If you got a minute, just let us know. I've got a loon. There's a loon episode I did that's in the YouTube, but I haven't dropped it out into the pod feed yet. But how cool are loons?
Thanks, Katie. It's so exciting meeting you, and big love to all our friends in the US.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. Oh, here we go. See, I always say something that gets me in trouble and I get pulled up. Yeah, I'm glad that the lakes are clean. I'm very happy about that, and it's good. So yeah, great. Good on you for being involved and taking part, Katie. And hopefully we'll see you out there in the socials or on another show. And subscribe to the Weekend Birder, because bird watching all around the world, we might talk about different birds, but there's an equivalent bird everywhere in the world, and the methodology and the joy of bird watching is the same everywhere, I would venture to say. Kirsty Costa, thanks for being a volunteer in the bird emergency, the fight to turn everyone into bird lovers. I'm sure you will be doing great. There we are. Loons. The loons aren't there yet. There we are. Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Kirsty. I can't wait to hear your the fruits of your labour, and I'm sure that it will be racing up the podcast charts, racing up the new entries. Number 9 with a bullet in the first week in the podcast charts. Great. Oh, you're going to get all that. Sorry, I will warn you about something. You are going to get, as soon as you publish an episode, you are going to get so much spam of people offering to help you with your podcast. It's going to be amazing. Good luck.
Thanks for having me, Grant. Thanks to the Bird Emergency and the really important, amazing episodes that you've got, which has inspired me to target a different group of people. And and many thanks to everyone who's, loving and talking about birds out there. So good.
Bloody fantastic. Okay. Kirsty Costa, Weekend Birder. Don't miss that podcast. I'm Grant Williams. This has been the Bird Emergency yet again. See you next time, bird nerds. Bye.